could dream of fights like this, but very seldom do they live up to the expectation. This is even more than you could dream of. Just imagine if you bought a ticket. Stop it, Frank. You can stop it anytime.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Dance Under Those Lights. This week's guest is none other than John the Iceman Scully. John is a familiar face for everyone these days, given his association with Beterbiev. He's been in the corner for a number of Beterbiev's most high-profile fights in the run-up to what is, we hope, going to be an amazing trilogy with Dmitry Bivol. But Scully had a fantastic career as a fighter himself. He was a highly decorated amateur in the US, winning multiple state Golden Gloves titles, as well as reaching the National Golden Gloves final. He sparred and worked in amateur teams with the likes of Roy Jones Jr. And Mike Tyson and many other big names of the 1980s. And he then turned over as a pro after 1988, when he went on to become an IBF light heavyweight world title challenger, falling just short, but regardless having a fantastic career as a competitor. When he moved into the ranks of the training world, he became a well-recognised trainer, partly due to his association with Chad Dawson. And we talk about his work with Dawson, particularly the fight against Bernard Hopkins, in this interview. John's effervescence, his energy, his love for the sport is unbelievable. It kind of blows you away, and I felt myself, although I was getting closer and closer because I wanted to listen to what he was saying, I also felt myself almost getting blown away with the intensity of John's passion for the sport. He's a straight talker, must have been an absolute handful for anyone in the ring, because he's still sparring today at the age of, what's he now, he'd be 50. He'll be well into his 50s anyway, and he's still sparring today. That shows the passion and the grit and the determination and the love for the sport and the competition that he has. Really importantly though, we finished this episode by focusing on the work that John does to raise funds for disadvantaged ex-fighters, many of whom have fallen on hard times financially with health problems, etc. It's an inconvenient truth of this amazing sport that unfortunately many fighters are not looked after and are in many ways neglected after they finish fighting, and John does phenomenal work. So I'd appreciate anyone who watches this, anyone who listens to the podcast, please look in the description for the details to be able to follow the work that John does, follow his socials. If anyone out there has memorabilia or has access to memorabilia, please support the work that John does. You can also make bids on the memorabilia that he sells, and any help at all, any small donation would go a long way to supporting the work that he does. He certainly warrants a great deal of credit for that, and he deserves the tag of being one of the nicest guys in the sport, despite being one of the toughest. Hope you enjoy this week's episode. Welcome to this week's show. I'm absolutely delighted to have the great Iceman John Scully on the show. John, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Fantastic. So thanks for coming on the show, John. We're going to go straight into a warm-up just to get the juices flowing, so to speak. So if you don't mind, can I ask you, in terms of trainers, whether that's current or trainers in the past, if you had your son boxing today and you had to choose one trainer that you think, I know there's horses for courses within the sport, and right, every fighter has a different character and a different kind of journey, and the same with trainers, and sometimes they fit and sometimes they don't. You know, your son or someone who, one of your friends' sons, and you felt this one trainer is gonna have the best chance of giving this young person a career in the sport and be the kind of mentor that you would want them to be. Who would you choose?
Right. Honestly, I would think people would expect me to say Angelo Dundee, Emmanuel Stewart, Freddie Roach, guys, I know these guys to a degree, Emmanuel, I know Emmanuel probably the best, new Emmanuel. Honestly, if I had a son, 15 years old, and wanted to put him in to a gym with a trainer, I would choose a guy from Connecticut by the name of Brian Clark from Ring One in New Haven. Brian Clark actually is the guy who started out Chad Dawson when Chad was a kid. He brought Chad up until about I think he had like 12 pro fights, 15, and they end up parting ways. And I actually started training Chad at that point. And I actually asked Brian's permission, and he told me, good. He said, if I could have Chad be with anyone, I'd have him be with you, so, but Brian is a very good amateur coach. He teaches a great style. He understands, how to win and how to get the most out of the kids. And he's super dedicated. And so honestly, if I had to let my son train with someone, I would give.
That's amazing. What a great answer. And can I just ask, before I go on to the next question, how did you manage that transition in terms of keeping, did you go to Brian for advice as Chad progressed under you as well? Did you stay in touch with him?
No, not particularly. No, I had my own thoughts.
Sure.
I didn't want to, I had to kind of mold Chad a little bit towards what I wanted as a pro. But yeah, like I said, I just, I called Brian. I said, look, they called me to train Chad. And I'm a different kind of person in a way. Like I told him, I said, look, I know Chad's undefeated and he's a big prospect. He's probably a future champion at that point. And I said, listen, I don't care. If you say no, it's no. Like I'll respect your wishes. But he was like, no, take him. I said, I'd rather have him with you because he knows you. Because I've known Chad since he was like 11, and we used to actually spar with each other quite a bit back then. So he knew me, and we all knew each other. But yeah, if Brian said no, I would have said no.
Awesome! What a great story, and a real, maybe a different answer to what a lot of people who come on the podcast would answer.
Right.
Amazing. Okay, let's go to the next question. So, a lot of people talk about their favorite fighter of all time or who they think is the greatest, but I'm interested to know, what do you consider to be the best streak in history? So it could be that it's a year or 2 years, 3, 4, 5 fights where a great fighter hit a real streak of fantastic high performance fights where they gave everything, they gave the best of themselves, they demonstrate the best of themselves. What do you think about when I ask you that?
I think Roy Jones in 1993 to 1995, nobody beats that guy.
Okay.
Nobody. I don't care what they bring, and I just don't think anybody, and I tell you, when we were amateurs, I was amateur with Roy, right? And I was amateur with a lot of guys, Gerald McClellan, ton of guys, right? And I sparred Roy as an amateur, and I did well. Like, you can see one of the videos is on YouTube. Like, I did well with Roy. I had my level of success, right? I was a weight class higher. I was 165. He was 156. So maybe I was a little stronger. But Roy was so good that when we went pro, we all went pro. Everybody in the class of 88 turned pro. So going down the line, I'm saying to myself, okay, if I had to fight this guy and if I had to fight that guy, after 10 fights, and every guy, I was kind of comfortable. I was like, all right, I could outbox this guy. Maybe I could too strong, whatever. But when I would come to think about Roy, I'd be trying to think like what it would be like and how to beat him in a real fight. I said, man, I can't come up with anything, because he was just so fast and he hit hard and he was dynamic. And I was really impressed with Roy Jones. He's the only guy. And if you would ask me this in 1988, I would have said this. I was sure he was going to be world champion. I was positive. There was no way. And I'm talking about the first time I saw him, which was in 1987. I called my father right after. I said, Dad, I don't know who this kid is from Florida, but he's going to be a world champion in 5 years. He's going to be on the Olympic team next year. And at that time, he was not even considered a contender for the Olympics. Frankie Lyles and Thomas Tate and Timmy Littles, those were the forerunners at 156 pounds. But when I saw Roy Jones for the first time, I called my father. I said, I just saw the guy who's going to the Olympics next year. He said, nobody's beat this guy.
You knew he was that special.
I knew as soon as I saw him.
And he was. So 93 to 95, we're talking super middleweight era then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, yeah, super middleweight. Super middleweight was his best weight, no question. Now, it wasn't middleweight, it wasn't light heavy. Now, you think about Muhammad Ali, 1965, 66, 67. I think he tortures every heavyweight in history. I don't think anybody, not even the big guys of today. Because, you know, you say, oh, the guys today are too big. I said, listen, Ernie Terrell was 6'6". Muhammad Ali had no trouble touching him. Like
That's
zero,
interesting.
zero, zero. These guys were not bigger than Ernie Terrell at that time, you know, and if anything, they were bigger and they were a little bit slower. But when Ali, I think Ali, his problem was, and he showed this later in his career, Ali fought to the level of his competition. He was so good that he could play with world-class, like Jerry Quarry. People forget how good Jerry Quarry was. They think he wasn't good because he lost to Ali and Frazier. They think he wasn't good. I said, listen, you got to look at this guy's record. Jerry Quarry, as an amateur, won the national championship. I think it was 5 knockouts. I think he's the only guy ever to do 5 knockouts in 1 week. And Jerry was very good, and Ali played with him. You know, he played with Ron Lyle. He was out of shape, it looked like, when he beat Ron Lyle, right? But meanwhile, Ron Lyle, you know, drops Foreman like 2 or 3 times in the fight of the century. You know, I think Ali was so good that he could literally go into fights with world-class guys and not even take it serious and still win.
We're touching a little bit on something I'm going to come on to later on in terms of comparing eras, because I've heard you speak so eloquently and with so much knowledge about that I'm desperate to get into that a little bit with you. But
yeah,
love that. Okay, great. One final question before we move to the main part. What is it you love about boxing?
Well, I'll tell you what I hate about boxing. I hate the business of boxing. I hate the fact that there's a such thing as an interim champion. That some guy is walking around with a belt claiming to be the heavyweight champion of the world, while Alexander Usyk is the heavyweight champion of the world because this guy has a regular silver emeritus belt, right? It's insane. But what I love about boxing, the same thing today that I did when I was 14 and 12 years old. Like, I started boxing. I'm a different kind of guy, right? I started boxing on my father's bed. He had a bed and there was a big mirror on the wall, right? He lived in a motel. They were divorced, so he lived in a motel, and there was a big mirror. So I said, man, I would have fights. I would fight against imaginary opponents on the bed. I would get on my knees on the bed and I would fight, and I would do commentary, and I would do post-fight interviews, and I would do the whole thing. And usually I would fight Jimmy Young. For some reason, me and Jimmy Young. And I would keep score of the rounds, right? I would do that. The reason I went to the gym the very first time, I was 15, is because I used to pretend I was Ali, right? So I wanted to go and box with other kids so I could pretend I was Ali with real people.
Yeah.
So when I'm in there at 14 years old, I'm sparring with these guys and I'm pretending they're Jerry Quarry, they're Ken Norton, you know, and that was my, you know, real life play date, you know, that was what, and I did that as a pro. I fought a guy named, and people might think I'm a little crazy, but I fought a guy named, like I would base who they were based on what they look like. Like if they were tall and slimmer, you know, they'd be like Bob Foster, right?
Yeah,
a shorter white guy, he'd be Jerry Quarry. So I fought at Foxwoods Casino, a 10-round fight, 1995, against a guy named Willie Ball. Willie was a tough kid. He was like a former IBO champion, you know, tough guy. In my mind, he was Ron Lyle. And I said, I'm Ali and I'm fighting Ron Lyle tonight. And I went into that fight pretending Willie Ball was Ron Lyle. So I maintained that through my whole pro career. You know, it was
and with the
just
benefit, sorry to interrupt you, with the benefit of hindsight, was he actually similar in terms of his characteristic?
Yeah, no, I based on how he looked. Like, that's why I chose Ron Lyle, because
did he box?
Because of his height compared to me, his facial features, you know, he kind of looked like Ron Lyle.
Okay,
you know? Yeah. No, he literally, you know, he could play maybe Ron Lyle in a movie, you know, and so yeah, like in the Golden Gloves, I remember I fought a you know, a tall, thin black kid named David Alexander. I remember saying, okay, he's Bob Foster, you know, he's Bob Foster. So I you know, I have my whole program mapped out in my head, right? And I maintained that my whole career.
And I take it it's not quite as simplistic as a trainer.
Yeah, it's a little different, but it was a natural progression for me because actually when I was fighting, I trained amateurs. I had a team. We called ourselves the 5-Star Bomb Squad. It was me and these 4 kids, and the youngest was like 11 at the time. And we traveled in between my fights. We traveled all over the country, the amateur tournaments. When I fought Michael Nunn, that was December 8, 1995. 3 weeks later, I was sleeping on the floor in a motel room in Lake Placid, New York, at an amateur tournament. And we only had enough money for the two beds, so I had to sleep on the floor, And one of the other coaches was on the floor across the room. And I remember it was like 2 a.m, and we're laying there, everybody's awake, and I go, hey, Brian. She's like, what? I go, 3 weeks ago, I was in a suite on ESPN at Foxwoods, and now I'm sleeping on the floor with you guys.
And which was the better night's sleep?
Probably with those guys.
Yeah.
With the amateurs, yeah. No, that's just the way it is. I wouldn't change anything. I still do that type of stuff.
Love it. And I think young fighters probably don't realize what they've got when they have those experiences until a long time afterwards, because
they look back and it's amazing. Like, I would rather sleep on the floor. Like, I knew at that moment that 20 years from now, this is going to be a memory we're going to talk about.
Sure.
Remember, we slept on, because I used to, and I got it from when I was an amateur. I used to hear about guys driving to the Ohio State Fair, and I remember Emmanuel Stewart, specifically. Emmanuel Stewart said he brought like Milton McCrory, who I literally just talked to on the phone like 10 minutes ago. I had to hang up with Milton McCrory because I had to do this interview. So I told Milton, I'll talk to you later.
Sorry, Milton.
But I remember them saying that the Kronk kids, they had no money. Emmanuel didn't have any money. So they would go and they would share like a Happy Meal. They would cut a hamburger in 4 pieces, and that was lunch, and they'd split the 2 French fries. And I loved it. I loved that kind of idea, So
Amazing.
we'd go to the Ohio State Fair in the early 90s. We'd have like 6 of us in a room, and we'd go to the store, we'd buy cereal and milk, and it was cool. I'd rather have that than stay in the Hilton Hotel and everybody gets their own room. I'd rather have us all bunked up in one room.
Amazing. And as I say, I think it's something that it's a privilege, and those happy memories, team ethic and supporting each other and not having a great deal, but what you've got, you're sharing with your teammate and your buddies.
Listen, I'll tell you another thing real quick. When I won the Ohio State Fair, which in the United States is a huge tournament, like it's huge. And I always wanted to go because Tyson won it. And I said, man, I got to go where Mike Tyson won the tournament. So my coach and I went. And back then, we didn't have credit. I didn't have a credit card. I didn't even know what a credit card was, But I won the tournament. I'll never forget. Me and my coach, John Tynan, we were in the hotel room together. And I won the fight, the finals. I won the championship. And I remember we went back to the room. We ordered a Domino's pizza and 2 Cokes, and we were in a motel. We had it delivered to us. And I remember when we went home, we had, I think it was like $13 between us. And that's what we went home with. We ended up with $13, but we won the title.
Well, but you felt rich, right? At
that
moment.
Yeah, for sure. One of the best days of my life.
Awesome. Okay. So look, let's, we're kind of reminiscing a little bit there, and I love listening to you speak. You're so passionate about the sport, John. It's amazing. I just love letting you go and listening to you talk. It's amazing. Let's talk about eras. So I listened to a podcast a while back where you came up with a fact that I've quoted on this show previously, that I think in 1947 there were more professional boxers in the state of New York than there are today in the entire United States of America.
That's right.
So to me, that speaks to the social fabric of the country in terms of what was entertainment, what sports did people have access to, what culturally did people actually do when it came to sport. But more than that, it also means that without a doubt, there must have been more competition. It must have been a brutal process to get through
the levels that you had to get through if you wanted to make it to the top. Whereas to me, I see modern fighters, maybe with the help of the business that you talked about before, which, I think everyone would have been nodding their head when you said, I know what I hate about the sport. And
Right.
if a businessman can open up a journey for a young fighter to get to somewhere where they don't really get exposed to the challenges that they need to be exposed to truly be a champion, then
Right.
that in those days, that wasn't possible, surely, right? That was the competition, and that must have been iron sharpening iron back in those days.
It was, well, I'll give you an example. I always use this example. When I started boxing as a kid, so you say, officially, I started boxing in 1982. I was 14. So say in Hartford, where I'm from, if you go, say, from 82 to 85, so those 3 years, right? If you were a welterweight or a junior middleweight and you needed sparring, right? You could go, now a junior middleweight would spar with a welterweight, he would spar with a middleweight, he would spar with a super middleweight. So that range, right? I could name for you 25 guys in the city of Hartford alone that he could spar with, right? Now, I'll give you an example. Myself, right? Back then, I was 156 pounds when I was a novice amateur open class. I could have sparred with, for example, just in Hartford, Marlon Starling, Troy Wortham, Felix Nance, Muhammad Shabazz, Brian Sims, Kumba Valentine, Nick Mejia, Richard Holloway, right? I can name a million more. Robert Murray, Robert Logan, David Davenport, all these guys, right? Today, to the best of my knowledge, there are 2 professional fighters, one in Hartford, total. Like, his name is Richie Rivera. He's a light heavyweight. There's another kid who's pretty good, I guess. I haven't seen him fight much, but he's good. He's undefeated. Mike Juan Williams, but he's actually from Manchester, which is like 5 miles away. So in our city borders, within the city, there's one pro fighter, right? Now, by comparison, when you have a title fight, like with Beterbiev, for example, Mark Ramsey gets on the phone, he calls America, he calls Germany, he calls France, he calls, wherever he calls, to get sparring for Arthur, to bring them in, right? When Marlon Starling, out of Hartford, fought for the world title against Donald Curry in 1984, he sparred with 5 good guys, 5 solid guys. Not only were they all from Hartford, they were all from his gym. He did not have to get anyone from even another gym. He had Tyrone Booz, Troy Wortham, Dale Wortham, Felix Nance, and Michael Bell. He sparred with those 5. Felix Nance actually knocked him out as an amateur. He knocked Marlon out as an amateur. And now as a pro in 1984, he was his sparring partner for the title fight with Donald Curry. You will never see that again. 5 guys from one gym. You will never see that.
As you say, it sounds like that was a kind of freakish coincidence at the time, and like I say, never to be repeated. But also, it's more likely to happen back then than it is now, right?
Yeah, for sure.
One question I would ask you though: was the city flush with amateur prospects at the time?
Yeah,
No,
they used to do shows. There was a place called the Girl Ballroom, which was kind of like our Blue Horizon from Philadelphia, right? They would do a series of shows called Battle of the Hartford Gyms. They would have one gym fight against another gym, and they would have 12 bouts. So they found 12 guys in one gym to match up with 12 guys in another gym in the same city and do a show. They could not do that today.
Oh, amazing. You mentioned Donald Curry there. I had a conversation with a friend the other day, 2 friends actually, about Donald Curry and Lloyd Honeyghan. So if you're from the UK, you probably still quote Lloyd Honeyghan as the best British fighter winning, or the best performance from a British fighter winning on away soil. Everyone talks about how good Donald Curry was at that time. How good was he?
Phenomenal. He was a guy, it's a weird thing. Trying to be like him actually hindered my career because I used to try to imitate Donald Curry. He kept his hands up and he countered so sharply, and he was able to time you and all these things, and he did it so effortlessly. And I tried to do that, but, the timing, it wasn't the same. And, just he had 400, probably over 400 amateur fights. I had 74, which is a lot, but nothing compared to what he had. But trying to be perfect like Donald Curry was, and I realized it actually taught me a lesson as a trainer, like never try to be perfect because you'll spend too much time focusing on it and you're not going to throw any punches. I should have, like when I was an amateur, I let my hands go more, but as a pro, I wanted them to talk about me like they talk about Donald Curry. They say, oh, Donald Curry's like the cobra. He's just waiting patiently to strike, and he sees an opening and he takes advantage of it and he bites you, and he sticks his fangs in you, and Donald Curry was amazing. He, and it's funny because I just got off the phone with Milton, but Donald's counter left hook against Milton McCrory, to me, is the best counterpunch in the history of boxing. You've never seen it. You may see ones close to being as good, but you can't tell me you've seen one better. There's no better counterpunch than the hook Donald hit Milton with. Period.
I'm gonna throw in Andy Lee just because I'm a huge Andy Lee fan, as I think many people on these shores are. But Andy Lee's, the John Jackson knockout, for example, under a huge
Is that the
amount of
one
pressure.
when he was hurt? When Andy was hurt?
He was hurt on the
Right.
ropes, yeah.
Well,
I mean,
listen,
he'd just been knocked down and he
right.
circled.
No, that was amazing. But see, the thing is, Donald planned this with Milton. If you watch the fight, you can see he had been planning it. It was super. But I actually just saw Andy in Saudi a few weeks ago. Yeah, we were in the gym together. Yeah, he's a good guy.
Oh,
yeah.
he's honestly he's my favorite fighter of all time.
Yeah, his hook is unbelievable. Unbelievable, yeah.
But as a trainer, as a media personality as well, he carries himself so impressively.
Yeah. He's a good guy. Yeah, I like him a lot.
It's great. It's great to hear that. So I want to swivel a little bit here and shift focus to your work in Chad Dawson's fight against Bernard Hopkins. Got a lot of credit and praise. First of all, mid-fight, how important is that 50 seconds that you've got in there to be able to get a message across to your fight?
Well, sometimes it's very casual. It's like, oh, it's no big deal. But sometimes you need it. You need every second of it. And I'll tell you a funny thing. It's funny you mentioned that fight. I was just telling someone the other day that apparently, and I'll tell you why apparently I got a lot of credit from, I guess, Jim Lampley or whoever was doing the announcing. Yeah, between rounds, they said I did a great job of keeping Chad focused in that particular round and everything. I've never seen the fight. I've never seen it on tape. I don't know what they're talking about.
Okay.
But I do remember this. People said, "Oh, you did a great job." And I keep saying, "Yeah, I got to watch it. It's been 12, 14 years and I haven't seen it." But I do remember this. I remember Chad had a reputation for kind of faltering down the line, like he would lose focus, right? So I try to use analogies. In everyday life, I use analogies, but especially with boxing, because I find fighters understand analogies. I do very, very well. I like analogies. So I used to tell Chad, I had to explain it to him, and I was trying to drive the point home. I said, listen, you cannot lose focus, period. I said, you have to look at it in these terms. You're a football player. You're a running back. You're in the end zone. You're at the 1 yard line. You've got 100 yards to go to score. Not 50, not 75, 99. You have 100 yards to go. You have to keep running until you reach 100 yards. Because if you stop at 98, as awesome as it was, you're not scoring, period. So we started out really well in that fight, as I recall. We were doing very well. Around the midway point, 7th round maybe, I thought Bernard was starting to figure it out. And I thought he was turning things around a little. And I do remember this. I remember saying to Chad, listen, everything we talked about, forget it. I want you to change your plan. We're not boxing anymore. I want you to flip it, and I want you to go straight to him. Because I think Bernard was trying to figure out, he was timing Chad's boxing. So I said, we can't let him do that. We gotta back him up now. Now we gotta totally throw him. But I do remember saying to him, listen, we're at the 50. We're at the 50-yard line. We got 50 more to go, man. And I thought from that point on, he won the rest of the fight. Like, I thought we cleaned it up in the last, 5 rounds. So I like to think part of that was me, but I haven't seen it, so I couldn't really say.
Pretty certain it would have been. That inspiration. And that, I asked you the question before about, the ideal trainer to mentor a young fighter. I think everyone who knows anything about boxing understands that you can have an incredible trainer who's won everything in the sport, worked with the biggest names, who just doesn't get an individual, doesn't tick the right boxes, doesn't connect, whatever it is. And if you have an ability to connect with lots of fighters and lots of human beings, you're going to have a better chance of being a better trainer, surely.
You know what I always say? Kelly Pavlik's trainer, right? Kelly Pavlik's trainer, guy from Ohio, and he's there. And a lot of people said, oh, Kelly, now that he beat Jermaine, he should go with Angelo Dundee. He should go with, Freddie Rhodes. I said, listen, man, that guy brought him to this point. He got him through this, because it wasn't just Jermaine Taylor that he beat, but right before that, he beat like Edison Miranda. He beat a bunch of good guys right in a row. I go, you think because those guys are more famous than his trainer that he should leave his trainer and go to them? I go, that guy brought him to this point. Just because he's not famous obviously doesn't mean anything. Like, he's the right guy. And the most famous guy is not always the right guy. Not even the most successful guy is not always the right guy for you. So you don't have to be famous or even have trained 40 world champions to be better than a guy that you never heard of.
Yeah. It's a really interesting topic, this, because in the last podcast I did with Terry Chapandama, who runs, he's a trainer himself, but he also runs a podcast, and it's a real trade podcast that a lot of people in the sport absolutely love Terry's work. He talked about you can build a fighter, or you can do the finishing. You can add the finishing touches, and it's interesting to compare someone who can add the finishing touches and work out whether or not they can actually build a fighter as well. And who do you have more respect for? Who's a better trainer in the end? There's no right or wrong answer to that. It's all
right.
about
And
right?
You know what? And I've said that to people. I said, like sometimes, and I didn't understand this when I was young. I remember, I know exactly the situation. George Washington trained Mark Breland. He also trained Michael Benn and Riddick Bowe when they were kids, all the way up, Olympic gold medal, all that. And when Mark went pro, he didn't have George as his head trainer. And I remember saying, that's crazy. He brought him all that way, and now he's got, whether it was Joey Ferriello or Georgie Benton or whoever. But I get it now. Like, you can be a great guy, great trainer, especially an amateur trainer. You can bring guys up, but there's certain things as a pro that are different than amateur. And being a professional trainer is a different mentality. It's a different approach. There's different things that happen. And so I get it, and I've been on both ends. Like, I've trained a guy, and a couple guys end up going pro, or I brought him up as top amateurs, right? But by the same token, sometimes you bring a guy to he's very great potential and all things, but you can't bring him all the way. And somebody with more insight into the pro game or whatever it is can take him the rest of the way. So they're both good. They're both super necessary. 100%. They're super necessary, but it's not always the same thing. There's guys who are literally professional cornermen. And I'll give you the perfect example that people will, when they think about it, they'll understand. I don't think Angelo Dundee would have the time, maybe, or the patience to take a kid as a kid and go to national tournaments and local tournaments and bring him up and then turn him pro. I don't think Angelo Dundee would want to do that. But when the time comes as a pro, and you need to know how to fight like a pro and what to do as a pro, and then when you're Sugar Ray Leonard and you're going into the 13th round against Tommy Hearns in 1981, you needed Angelo Dundee percent Angelo Dundee sparked that victory. Angelo Dundee, in many ways, is responsible for that victory, and Ray will tell you that himself.
Sure,
And
sure.
going into the 11th round, I don't know if you remember this, 6 minutes going into the 11th round against Marvin Hagler. You can clearly see Sugar Ray Leonard, the energy that went through him at that moment when Angelo said 6 minutes. There's no doubt in my mind Angelo pushed him to win those last 2 rounds and win that fight. Now, you needed Angelo Dundee, who's never trained a kid in his life from the beginning to become a pro fighter. So you can argue all you want, but Sugar Ray Leonard needed Angelo Dundee that night.
It's such small margins once you get to the highest level of anything in life.
Right.
To, like you say, if he knows how to say the right thing at the right time to get a 1% improvement in his concentration and therefore his performance in the first 5 seconds of that 12th or that 11th round, then that marker that he put down there is connected to that character, that personality, that ability to connect. And it's amazing. And what you don't have to criticize. I think there's way too much criticism in life these days.
Right.
Why not give a bit more praise? Give praise to people who build. Give praise to people who finish off. If you can,
for sure,
100%, fantastic,
100%.
Awesome. Okay, it's quite interesting. We talk about that. I want to go on to your current role, particularly on Team Beterbiev. It's a rivalry, Beterbiev and Bivol, that I think will stand the test of time amongst the greatest, and a career that Artur's had that is just the world over. It's respected the world over. I see how Mark runs and keeps his counsel and communicates. I'm really impressed by the way he carries himself in a sport that ego is so preeminent,
ego.
Right?
Mark
he doesn't
has
seem
no
to have
ego
any. No.
at all. None.
And we're talking about Angelo Dundee there, who was probably a showman in the corner in some respects. And you can go to Teddy Atlas, and you can go to the great, all those greats, but it's a different style, and yet just as effective, if not more effective, maybe. But my question to you, with all that said, is how's the team break down? And your character, your effervescent energy for the sport must work nicely with Mark in that context.
I think we have a good mix, and I'll tell you what kind of guy Mark is as a trainer. When I got the call to join the team, and it was kind of like a tryout to join the team, and what they wanted, what Artur wanted, was someone on the team who had experience at a certain level as a professional fighter before, right? He wanted someone to relate to that. Now, Mark was not a fighter, right? A little bit of amateur. So Mark said, oh, no problem. So they knew me, and Russ Amber actually knew me much better, and Russ was on the team at the time. So they called me up for a tryout. And, I guess we hit it off right away, me and Artur and I. So not long after, I was getting interviews because people were curious to know what's going on. And they would say, all right, we're here with Artur Beterbiev's trainer, John Scully. And I'd, hey, listen, man, I'm not the trainer. And at best, I'm the assistant trainer, but Mark is the trainer. So after it happened a few times, I went to Mark. I said, hey, Mark, I just want you to know, like, told Mark, I said, listen, I didn't tell the guy I was Artur's trainer. I didn't say that. And he told me, listen, I don't care about that. He goes, doesn't make me any difference at all. And I said, well, he goes, no, I don't. He goes, I want the fighter to win. That's it. And on that end, recent, at the last fight during training, there was an article in Ring Magazine about the top trainers, and they included Mark as one of the top trainers of the year. He was in the running for trainer of the year. So I had the magazine, and somebody had given it to me because, whatever was in it. So I told Mark, you should keep this, you're in there. He goes, you keep it. I said, yeah, but they keep calling me. So I said, you're going to want this. He goes, you keep it. And he didn't, I got it in my room. It's at my house. So he's just interested in doing his job, and that's it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's amazing. And I think, what I love about it is that you've got a guy there who is so understated and so humble and with no ego in the biggest show. I mean, that Feb 22nd card, I don't care, if you want to talk about the Don King cards or whatever, that doesn't have to be the biggest, but it doesn't get much bigger than that, and it never will do. The sport will never get, I don't think, much bigger than that. You might have another contender to put in that list of great cards through history, but that really, in my opinion, I just don't see that there's any way that the sport can realistically put on something that was better than that in terms of
Right.
content.
Yeah,
Right?
no, it was amazing. And, especially when you had the Joe Parker situation, with the heavyweight title fight, and it's, throws, it added a different flavor to the whole event. And yeah, the whole thing, I like the way they do things over there. You go, and the way they make a big deal out of everything. Like the public workout is a big deal. Press conference is a big deal,
Sure.
and the mock weigh-in is a big deal. I go to the mock weigh-in, and Roberto Duran's up on the stage, and I turn to go towards my seat, and I literally physically bumped into Lennox Lewis, and I'm like, oh man, Lennox, hey, and we took a picture, it was cool. These are the type of people that are there just at not even just the fight, but they're at the events leading up to the fight. De La Hoya was there, and yeah, it was good. It was good.
I said to my son prior to that, I said, I don't think it will get any bit better than this. Not just in terms of as a statement, across history, but also in terms of where the Saudi project, I think, was going to peak. And so it's going to start to change a little bit now, I suspect.
And like I was saying, it's not just the matchups, but it's the whole event from beginning to end. Like when you go, I've been there twice. When you go there for the fights, when they do the press conference, when they do the mock weigh-in, when they do everything, it's at this one particular pace, and there's people everywhere. Like crowds show up. Roberto Duran was up on the stage, and Lennox Lewis is standing right next to me. I bumped into him by mistake. And there's people everywhere just into this, and it's just a huge deal. They treat everything like it's Las Vegas. Like it was like Las Vegas. Like there's light shows. This is at the weigh-in. This is at the press conference. There's light shows. They have a public training session where the people can come watch them, work out for 20 minutes. So it's, they do it right. I think the term promotion, like a boxing promotion, right? Promoters don't really promote like they used to. These guys they promote the fight. The show is promoted in a big way. Yeah, they're doing a good job. Yeah, for sure.
Nice. I think we've all benefited if you love the sport. I want to touch on amateur boxing. A couple of things before we close the show. So, amateur boxing is something that when I look back on your life and your history and your career as a fighter, world title contender at light heavyweight, super impressive career, one of the best around when you lace them up in the pro ranks. But I really love the stories that I read about your amateur career. So I just want to ask you, John, really, how do you feel about the amateur sport in the US at the moment? And how does it compare with the amateur sport that you remember?
I mean, I'll say that amateur boxing is probably the greatest thing ever to happen to me. Like the most exciting, the most, the thing I'm the most proud of. I think actually as a fighter, from my beginning of my career to the very, very end, I think the best I ever was as a boxer was for about a year and a half as an amateur. There was a year and a half span where I think I was really good. Like I was beating a high level of opposition, and I was very consistent. And, I think if I wanted to point to myself when I was at my best, I would say all of 1987, which I won 17 out of 18 fights in 1987. And my only loss was a 3-2 split in the finals of the National Golden Gloves. And I won 2 other national tournaments that year, beat a bunch of ranked guys who were very good fighters. So I was at my best during that time. And then for the first half of 88, but amateur boxing, I wouldn't trade anything. If I could cancel either my pro career or my amateur career and have it never happen, I would keep my amateur career. Like I had such good times and I was just, it was my whole life. Everything was just, man, it was just about fighting and traveling and training in the gym. I would go to the gym, and if there was no one there to spar, I would be enraged. I would throw gloves across the room and hit the wall. And I'd be like, nobody's here. Nobody's here to spar today. You know, I just wanted to box. That's all I wanted to do was spar with people. Yeah.
And you still spar today, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Amazing. Amazing. Well, that's testament to that then, isn't it?
Yeah.
So just to finish on the amateur side, so do you think that there are young fighters who are going to leave the amateur code today or in this era who are going to feel the same way about the sport as you did back then? I mean, how do you see the amateur sport just from your viewpoint today?
I would think everybody at any level would feel the same as I do. Now, they may not realize how much better it was back then. Like, they'd be ecstatic if they do. And I'll give an example, like not just the number of fighters, but like when I was in the Golden Gloves, our Golden Glove, our local tournament was 6 weeks long. It was 6 Saturdays in a row. And the fights would go till like 1 o'clock in the morning. There would be 38 fights on a show, almost 40 bouts on one show, right? Now it's like 3 weeks, and it's sometimes on some shows it'd be like 9 bouts, right? Like my first year in the Golden Gloves, there was 16 guys in my weight class, right? 16 other guys. This year in the same weight class, there's like 3, maybe 4, sometimes maybe 2. So it's different. The rivalries, like when you have a tournament where there's 16 guys in a weight, you get to know who's who and who's looking good and who's, I can't wait to,
and you doing
these
5
guys
in
are
5?
on a course.
Yeah. Are you doing five fights in 5 days there?
No. In our local tournament, it's like, 3 weeks or whatever it is, and you fight a week apart. At the Nationals is when you fight every day, 5 days in a row. Yeah. So to win the National Golden Gloves in America, you have to fight 5 days in a row.
Yeah, that's some achievement, isn't it? And like you say, I mean, if you've got a category that's that deep, then the winner deserves it.
I'll tell you this, to compare. In 1984, when I won the state championships, I had to fight 3 times in one day, 3 times in like less than 2 hours. Like it was that kind of competition.
Wow, that's like going into the boxing booth at the old fairs, that, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Which by the sound of it, you'd have probably loved, John.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
Okay. Final comments and final topic I want to touch on. I read somewhere that you won some kind of boxing nice guy award not all that long ago.
At the crazy thing, at the Boxing Writers Association dinner in New York City.
Okay, I didn't do it justice when I made that flippant comment.
It's the biggest event of the year, the biggest dinner of the year.
I apologize.
I won that. They call it the Good Guy Award, and it's a huge thing. Like where they have a huge screen on the wall that's like the size of a movie theater screen, and they show your picture on there. And I had never been to this dinner in my life. They called me. They said, "Congratulations, you're going to be honored at this dinner in front of everybody." And as luck would have it, I was in training camp with Beterbiev, and I couldn't go. I could not be there. So somebody had to accept it on my behalf.
Wow.
But it was cool.
Well, I'll repeat, I clearly didn't do it justice. Winning that is testament to how other people view you in the sport, but it's also testament to the work that you do for charity and particularly for fighters after they finish fighting. And John, I love what I see. I mean, I see it on my socials all the time. You're promoting it all the time. You're constantly looking to use your influence within the sport to help people who don't have the ability to do that. What are your plans in that area? Tell us a little bit about it, because I want to push it out there as part of this show as well.
Well, I'll tell you what happened. It was about, I can't even, 8 years, 10 years, whatever, 8 years, say. And I had heard that Wilfred Benitez was in bad shape, and he needed some help. And I started thinking, man, I have some memorabilia, and I have access to a lot of guys, friends of mine that are champions. And I said, man, I could probably get, maybe Roy Jones or somebody. And sign something, and I could probably auction it off to boxing fans, and I could just give the money to Wilfred. It'd be cool. And I did it like so easy one day. Like people, because see, I'm used to seeing these things, right? Like, signed gloves, right? But most boxing fans, they don't have access to that. So to them, it's a big deal. Like you get a glove signed by, George Foreman or, whoever. So there's a market for it. So I said, man, it's a marriage. It's a perfect marriage. These people want these items. I have some access to get them. I'll give it to them, and I'll give the money to whoever needs it. So, and then as it started happening more and more, people, other fighters would be like, hey, man, I'm having some trouble as well. Like I remember one time a guy called me and he said his grandfather just passed away and they didn't have money to bury him. They didn't have money for the funeral. So I said, man, it's crazy. So I called a friend of mine who was at Ring 10. This is years ago. Ring 10 in New York is a group that was helping fighters, And I called him and I said, and his name is Matt Farrago, by the way. He was a former fighter. And so I said to him, this fighter, he needs money. Can you help? Does your organization do that? And 5 minutes later, the guy calls me and he's like, man, some guy just called me and he's going to pay for the funeral. He's going to pay for everything. I said, it's amazing. This is unbelievable. So other guys would call me, hey, man, I'm going to get evicted if I don't pay my rent this month. And so I'd call some people or I'd raise the money myself and we get the rent paid. And it just kind of snowballed from there. And now it's at the point where literally I have boxing fans who I do not know. I've never met these people in my life. I've never interacted with them. And they'll send me a message and they go, hey, I've got a glove signed by Mike Tyson. If you want, I'll mail it to you and you can auction it off to help a guy. And I'm like, here's my address. And sure enough, 5 days later, I've got the gloves. I call it my joint task force. We've got a group of people who are really helpful, and we're helping a lot of guys. Yeah.
John, that's amazing. Absolutely amazing to hear. I mean, there's so many good people in this sport.
Yeah.
So many good people.
I'm seeing them more and more. I had a guy, Bobby Ches, who has cancer right now, and we're doing a fundraiser for him. And I had a couple cards, trading cards of Bobby's, and I put them up for sale and, give the proceeds to Bobby. So I've already got like over $600 right now. So this guy who I talk to on occasion, but I've never met him, he said, listen, I'll make a deal with you. I'll send you 5 Bobby Ches cards. If you have Bobby sign one for me, you can auction off the other 4 and give him the money.
Fair deal.
And that's exactly what I did. And I'm going to see Bobby in about 6 days, and he's going to sign the cards, and I'm going to hand him the cash, and done deal.
You're doing something about it. We've all read a lot. I mean, Tris Dixon's book, Road to Nowhere, he talks about Matthew Saad Mohammed and so many other fighters who fell on hard times. And we all know that it happens. We all know it's an inconvenient truth for a lot of people who are in the sport, I think.
Yeah. Hey, let me just say real quick, Road to Nowhere is a great book.
Yeah. Incredible.
That's a tremendous book. Every boxing fan should have that book for sure.
Awesome. Yeah, I think he does amazing stuff for the sport of boxing, Tris.
Right.
But it's, you in the UK, you see the likes of Nick Blackwell, a brain injury after his fight with Chris Eubank Jr. And that's been in the news recently again. And you just feel like there's not enough good news about how those situations are handled. And John, what you're doing is amazing. So how can I push the message out? Do you have a website? Do you have is it just on your socials?
Yeah, just people send me messages on either Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, and if they want to donate something or donate. But sometimes people will actually call me and they'll say, man, I'd like to donate. Like I just this morning, I had someone send me $50 to give to Bobby. And I said, okay, I'll give it to him. But if you want to give it to Wilfred Benitez or Gerald McClellan, I could give you the their Venmo, and you could Venmo it directly.
Venmo is like a payment platform.
Yeah, payment. Yeah. You just it's wired to the bank, and it takes like literally 6 seconds to do.
Cool. Okay. No. Well, look, you know, for the people watching this or listening to this on the podcast, you know, get along. If you have any memorabilia, or you have the access to be able to get people who have memorabilia lying around, we know a man who can make good use of it.
Yeah, or if you want to purchase some memorabilia, I mean, I've sold things on my Facebook. I just do it on my Facebook. I put it up and I tag some people and I say, all right, make a bid on, you know, I'm like the auctioneer. You know, sometimes something might go for $25, or I sold a glove, it was a belt. It was a signed belt by a bunch of guys. Last year, the guy gave me $5,000 for the belt. So, you know,
That goes
it's
a long
amazing.
way. That will go a long way.
For sure. And that's the thing. Like some of these fighters, I just give them $100 and they're so appreciative, like really appreciative, you know? So 5,000, that's like $1 million.
Great work, John. Great work. Okay, a lovely note to finish on. John, congratulations on everything you've achieved in the sport of boxing. Please keep on talking to people like myself about the sport and about your passion for it, because I love listening to anything you put out there. I'm really, really grateful you've come on this particular podcast. And I wish you every success in everything that you do. It's been an absolute pleasure for me.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. I'm honored, man. I hope we get to do it again sometime.
I do too. Be good. Thanks so much, John.
Thank you.
Take care.
Yeah. All right.